Hello, lovely artists. It's Mrs. Cloet here in the Great Big Art Room, and today is the day that we are jumping on into our good copy for our enchanted environments. As a quick reminder, this is an example of a finished enchanted environment. This student chose to have the subterranean sections be the little hallways. What I like about this one is it's pretty obvious still where our grid lines and our angles would be. Right, every line going this way is definitely distinctly and noticeably parallel, and every line going this way also parallel. And then all of these corner spots are perfectly vertical. So this student did a fabulous job thinking outside the box, but also maintaining that look of a grid. Here, this one I like to show because this is a partway through, and you can still see the grid lines. So you can see kind of the thought process here. This student's was so simple, they actually end up starting over again, which is why I end up with this halfway done project. But I like showing it because it shows kind of that first step of the grid we're going to create together and the beginning of some subterranean ideas. Quick review too of some outside the box thinking. This is a student that loved landscapes and Pokemon, so created a Pokemon landscape. But this one I love to show because it's really outside the box thinking. However, it's definitely following all the exact rules, and they started with the exact same grid. So every line you see going this way is parallel, every line you see going this way is parallel, and then their vertical lines are there too. They've just raised some areas, added steps and stairs on others, and sunk other areas down. So it's really fun to see some really creative outside the box thinking. And then finally, I like to show this one. That's really kind of beyond next level. So they've now gone super creative, popped up some cylindrical columns, some really funky, looks like Japanese style architecture rooftops, but they still of course have those subterranean areas. They just went next level and included windows and doors and all sorts of fun stuff. A waterway, but you can still see these lines are parallel everywhere. These lines are still parallel everywhere. They've just really thought outside the box and gone super high detail. But this one's fun to see too, that they've just included these punches of color. And we are going to add those punches of color once we get our basic concepts down, and it really kind of helps us tie some of our new watercolor painting techniques in and some nice focal points. But as you're going with your rough copy or your rough work, you've chosen a theme. You've decided what kind of recognizable theme you want to include. And remembering in an image like this, you can see how the shading and the add-in highlights and shadows, you can see the shadow of this dragon is really obvious. That helps elevate it to the next level. So what's so fun about this project is that you're really creating this neat illusion of depth. And then of course adding color and shading just adds kind of next level thinking to that illusion of depth that we're going with. So step one, you are going to find your watercolor paper. You may have got this in class, you may have received it in an art kit, but it's pretty critical that you find your watercolor piece. You'll know it's watercolor paper because it is a little thicker. It's not quite as thick as Bristol board, but it's pretty darn close. And it also has a bit of texture to it, or in the art world we call it tooth. So if you feel it or if you look closely, you'll notice a little bit of texture on, particularly on one side of your watercolor paper. So please make sure you have this as your good copy. It's already cut into a square for you. Step number one, before we even do our measuring or our grid measuring, we're actually going to create a frame. We're going to create a 1/2 inch border, or it could be a 1 centimeter border if you have a centimeter ruler. So either a 1/2 inch or a 1 centimeter border around the entire piece. That's for two different reasons. One, because having an isolated border often makes our artwork look more professional, really elevates it to a polished look at the end. But also, if you are wanting to create washes of watercolor paper or watercolor paint that we'll talk about a little later, then having a 1 centimeter border or a 1/2 inch border is also helpful because you may want to use masking tape and tape off the frame so that you can create a wash, but that's up to you later. Either way, together we are going to create a border. So I'm going to choose a 1/2 inch border, but again, if you've got a centimeter ruler, you can do a 1 centimeter border. So line up your ruler and just make a little tick at the 1/2 inch or the 1 centimeter mark I feel like I only need one, like 2 or 3, maybe 4 marks, and then I can connect them. So I've made 3 little marks here, and then I can line up my ruler. There we go. And there's the first line of my 1/2 inch border, and I'm going to continue that on all 4 sides. And then I find it easier for me to swing the page around, but you could also swing the ruler around if you feel so inclined. This really only takes a couple minutes, but I always find creating a consistent border around a good copy really does bring it up to a more polished final piece or a final look. So if I'm going a little too fast, you are always, of course, welcome to pause the video and let yourself catch up. So that we can kind of do this together. Oh, it's not quite perfect. There we go. Awesome. So if you want, you can go back and erase these kind of extra tails, but you can also do that later. A reminder, this is a perfect opportunity to remind you, now that we're working on our good copy paper, we know that we start with this grid and we use this perfect, precise grid to make this isometric perspective piece look perfect, because the perfection piece and the measurement piece really is what makes this work. But it's a reminder too that a lot of what you create in this initial grid will end up being erased in your good copy. You use this grid to make your lines perfect, and then you'll end up going back and erasing certain sections. So it's a great friendly reminder to work really, really lightly at this stage in the game, because you may, or you probably will, end up erasing so much of this grid by the end. So here we go. My next task, we've got our 1/2 inch or 1 centimeter border around the entire outside. Then I'm going to go through here and I'm going to measure, or I'm going to make little marks every inch. You'll remember from our practice page that we were marking 1/2 inch, or I think I said 2 centimeter border, or sorry, markings. But now this is a small square, this is only 5 inches. We've now jumped to 12-inch square. So we are actually increasing the marking, or the measurements. So on this good copy paper, I'm going to be marking 1-inch increments. If you have a centimeter ruler, precision would be 2.5, but you are welcome to round that up to mark at the 3 centimeter marks. The specific measurements, the number itself, doesn't matter. It just needs to be consistent all the way around. And if you really wanted, in this one, you can see in this example, this student actually measured 1/2 inch increments, which is also why they have a whole lot more grid lines and they're closer together. On this demo, I'm going to do 1-inch lines, and I think you could do 1-inch lines as well. It's a little less to erase, and then each of your spaces can be a little bit bigger. But depending on how tight you want to go, you are welcome to go 1/2 inch as well. As long as it's consistent, it's totally fine. So here I go. I'm actually going to go on the outside of my border, but ever so lightly, because that border is going to be pretty crisp white. So here I go. I'm just measuring. Oops, I slid my ruler. There we go. At the 2, at the 3, at the 4, the 5-inch, 6-inch, 7-inch, 8-inch, 9-inch. That's the corner. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side. Just want to make it totally perfect as I can make it before I start marks. There we go. 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, 4 inch, 5, 6, 7, 8 inch, 9 inch, and that's the corner. Okay, if you recall from the practice page, now I'm creating the first of my parallel lines that are a diagonal. And I can even just see on when I lay my ruler in that top left corner, I want to mark it 1, 2, 3. I can go 3, I could even go 4, but that's gonna keep your diagonals tight. If you go 3 or 2, it's gonna open up your squares or your subterranean spaces if you go a little wider. 1, 2, 3. I think I'm going to do 3, but I would say 3 or 4 typically makes a pretty great looking subterranean space. So I'm actually going to make my lines quite dark just so that you can see them on the camera. But here's another friendly reminder, I'll try to remind you a few times, that you really want to work very lightly. Okay? A mechanical pencil is awesome sometimes, and this is nice for a mechanical pencil because you don't have to worry about sharpening it. However, a mechanical pencil is typically tough for carving into the paper. So again, I'm going dark so that you can see what I'm doing, but in real life, and for you, I'm hoping that you go really lightly. Barely there, pencil marks. So I'm going obviously marker to marker, but it's also good, just in case you made a little mistake in measuring your marks, to just double check before you create the line that it looks parallel, right? Use your critical skills and your eyeballing skills to just make sure that it looks like you're creating parallel lines. So I'm going to go all the way along, and then you'll notice you get to a spot where there's a marker on one side, but you're past your marker on the other, and that's okay. You have a couple options once I get there. Okay, so here I am. I have this section, I have this section that doesn't have, there we go, markers. So you've got two options. One option is to just eyeball it. You know that you've got the markers on this side, so you can eyeball it. The other option is to create the same measurements, so your 1 inch measurements along the top and bottom. And then there's probably a mathematical rule to it, but surely I do not know, that you'll end up seeing that one of your marks goes right to the marker and one of them goes to the halfway point. And I'll show you what I mean. Oops, that's a little off. There we go. In a second. Really what this part comes down to is your skills in eyeballing, just to double check. So I'm going from this next marker and I can see it lines up with, let's just see if it's a halfway point. I think this one's the halfway point, because this to me looks parallel. Okay. And then you've got this next one, which will be a marker. Yeah, there we go. Well, let's see. I can eyeball it. There we go, and I like to just spin my page around. I find that a little easier. So feel free to spin or continue, up to you. And then this section, I'm just gonna eyeball it. But that can be challenging, so just do what you know, or the method that you know you can get it just right. I actually feel like eyeballing seems like it's gonna take less time, but it actually takes the same amount of time to get it just perfect before you commit to that line. No. Okay, so here's my whole single side. Okay, now I'm going to do the same thing but in the opposite direction. So I'm going to start in my right side corner and I'm going to count down 3 because that's what I did on this one. You can double check. So I started in the top corner and I went 1, 2, 3, I connected it to my third marking. So now you're going to do the same thing, but on the other side. So start in my top corner, and I'm going to mark 1, 2, 3. I know I need to connect it to this marking. I'll line it up just so I'm perfectly exact. Oh shoot, look what I did. My long fingernail just got in the way. Let's try that again. Another perfect example of why it's super important to work really lightly. I'm working dark, I'm pushing hard so that you can see on the camera what I'm doing, but in real life, I would definitely be going much, much lighter than this. So here I'm going marker to marker. I'm actually going to go on the side because I feel like I want to push hard to make this extra dark. There you go. Awesome. And then continue all the way along to make this perfect grid. Remembering when we did 1 and 2 point perspective that there really are hard and precise rules on our line work. This one is isometric perspective, which means there is set measurement or set parallel lines. In traditional 1 and 2 point perspective, if you recall, with our 1 and 2 point perspective practice pages, you have lines that converge at a vanishing point. Here in isometric perspective, we are just creating consistent parallels. Okay. Try to get this exact. There we go. Almost there. Okay, and now I've got my corner to my last third marking up. Let's see if I can get it exact here. There we go. I gotta move my hand. This is one where it feels like, oh my goodness, Mrs. Cloet, you're being very fussy, and typically in the art world, creativity is king as opposed to the fussiness. But this is one of those projects where having a very formal technique is actually most definitely critical for success. So if you're the kind of student, kind of art student that loves precision, technical stuff, then this is a great project for you. And if you're kind of a free-spirited creative, which is kind of who I am, then I just have to pay closer attention to what I'm doing, because it doesn't necessarily come as naturally to me, this precision and marks and techniques. But in that sense, it's also wonderful practice for my brain to learn something new, learn something challenging. There we go. Okay, my last line. Awesome, so here I am. I've now created this perfect grid. The other thing you can do if you want, and you can see on the practice page, I'll see if I can get it closer. On the practice page here, I've actually included some vertical lines. You're welcome to do that if it helps. Because we're now working on a larger page, sometimes when I'm trying to create vertical lines, my ruler is so far from the edge, it's a bit tougher to make sure or ensure that I am creating perfectly vertical lines. So you are welcome to find where these lines converge and create some vertical lines. So I might go ahead and do just a couple of those so you can see what I'm doing. And it just makes my life a little easier to get perfect verticals. However, reminder again, you want to work with really light lines so you can erase them later. Let's just see if I can get this perfect, just eyeballing it. This feels a little off. There we go. Okay, I've added a couple verticals just to help me. So here we are. Grid done. You can pause the video, of course, until you're totally caught up, and then we can do our first removal of these subterranean spaces together. Okay, so now we have our grid set. I've included these vertical lines, but they're not totally necessary. Just a nice visual reminder that all of your vertical lines need to be perfectly vertical and of course parallel to each other. So my next step is where what my demonstration looks like and what your good copy looks like are going to be different. I'm going to go through the process with you, but again, you're not following along exactly with what I'm doing because you have your own vision and your own distinct theme and your own concepts that you went through on your practice sheet. Here's a reminder of the practice sheet. So you've gone through the process of creating these subterranean spaces, and then you can flip over on the back and come up with different theme ideas, and then on your rough paper you're going to practice some sketches of the characters or objects or scenery or buildings or whatever it may be to go through some rough work and practice the style of what you're going to include. So just to reference some of the examples I have, right, this one is kind of a Japanese fantasy theme. This one is the Pokemon landscape waterfall theme. This one is distinctly a landscape island theme. So these are all little raised sections. This one's a little hard to see with the lighting, but this one is a seasonal theme. So there's spring, summer, winter, and fall. This one is a Stephen King theme. Okay, so you need to have a distinctive theme. You're going to end up being marked on your ability to create highlights and shadows and shading, of course. That all of your lines are parallel, whether they're on this angle, these are all parallel, these are all parallel, and your verticals are all parallel. But those are really the specific breakdown, okay? And of course you need to have 7 openings. You can see in this example here, they're just like basic 7 openings. You're gonna move past that and start to showcase your creativity. Are there 7 openings? In this one, it's hard to think about that sometimes, but I can see that there's 7 different spaces. So they may be raised spaces, they may be subterranean spaces. This is like a fountain style. This is still a subterranean space. This one's raised. This one has significantly more than 7. So as long as you've got 7 openings that are different, you're in good shape. But a nice reminder to go back to the slide presentation that I've posted just to remind yourself before you even start what the requirements of this project are. So again, I'm going to walk you through how to create 1 subterranean space. Maybe we'll have time for 2, but they're not going to be the exact same as yours. So please don't feel like you should be following along. You can watch the demonstration, and then depending on your vision, you're going to create subterranean spaces or raised spaces in your own style. But of course, they are still going to follow all the lines of, or all the rules of these parallel lines. So I'm going to make one just in the middle because it's probably the easiest thing for you to see if it's dead center. I had said earlier, I've got dark lines in hopes that you can see them really easily. I'm just trying to decide where I want to go. But of course it makes it harder to erase. So just a reminder, always be working quite lightly in pencil. So what I've done is I've just erased a couple interior lines. So I'm making this kind of Z space, and I'm going to make it basically subterranean. Remembering as a step 1, I'm going to erase or kind of have a vision in my mind where my space is going to lie. And then this next step, when I start adding in my vertical lines, the length of this vertical line determines how deep my subterranean space or how deep this underground room is going to be. I like to use a familiar measurement, so it could be 1 centimeter deep or 1.5. I might do 1.5, just so that every time I create a vertical line in this space, I can make it the same length. So there's my 1.5. Now I'm going to make the line where the wall meets the floor, and I'm going to be very careful to make sure that this line is parallel. I have to admit, having a clear ruler can be extra helpful, but definitely not a necessity by any stretch. There we go. So this is where this wall meets the floor. And I'm going to do the same thing, but on that opposite angle, making sure that it is super duper parallel. Now this is a short line. I'm actually going to switch pencils because I had a nice sharp one before. Okay, there we go. So now you can start to see this is the wall of my subterranean space. And I know that if I'm seeing this room, I have to make this wall as well. And I remember that I did 1.5 centimeters as my depth for this room. But you can make yours extra deep or extra shallow, whatever your vision determines. And then I'm going to include these super parallel lines. See, what's nice with this grid, and the reason we do this grid, is I can use this line below with the bottom of my ruler, and I can eyeball that really much easier than the one above, the space above. So there I've got another corner of my room. I've got a little extra length here, so I'm going to get rid of that. There we go. And then I'm starting to see this floor, but I know I have another wall to add here. So I'm going to put my pencil where I want it to start, and I'm going to mark off 1.5 centimeters. And then I'm going to create my final parallel. Let's just be extra fussy to make sure it's actually parallel. There we go. Nope, a little deeper. There we go. Okay, now I have my subterranean space. So if I shade really lightly, you're not going to do this, of course, but I'm just doing this for your visual benefit so you can see this floor space. I am shading this just so you can see what is the floor or the carpet, or it could be lava, or you could make it water, or whatever you want, whatever your vision is for your theme. Now you can see this floor space. So based on where I'm looking as a viewer, it's like I'm looking on this angle and I'm peeking into this new space. So I'm seeing this subterranean room. I don't actually get to see what's tucked behind this wall because it's covered, because it's a bit of a deeper hole. So now you can kind of see the space that I'm creating. What's funny is I kind of created a space that's very similar to the one I did in this practice sheet. But I like to do it as a demo, have some zigzags and edges as opposed to a basic square, because it helps remind you where I need to create those visual lines to create that sense of a room. Okay, so here you can see this space that I've created. And then as you continue, you're going to create at least 7 different openings, but of course you can be incredibly creative with whatever vision or style that you're thinking for your theme. But I want to make sure that I've got spaces that are a little bit different. They're not all this same space over and over again, right? This is to show that you really understand the concept and the techniques involved in creating a space or a scene like this. Okay, I like to show this too. I gave this to you as a handout, but I've also posted it in the classroom. Just 3 kind of, I didn't actually show you the entire artwork. I just took a picture and then cropped it so that I could fit all 3. Here's one of the handouts that's on your Google Classroom, or it may also be in your printed package, just to show you the very different concepts that students have come up with. And these are all 3 different student works. This one is actually kind of like an animal takeover. You can see this huge squirrel in this regular space. This one almost looks like a Roman style architecture city. And this is like a surrealistic or fantasy piece. So there's like, this room is like facial features. This one is obviously a huge person kind of coming out with their hands from this very, very deep hole. This one's a more shallow hole. So this is more like a surrealism theme altogether. So again, you can be as absolutely creative as you like with all sorts of additions, right? Bumps up, sunken in, things floating in the air. Whatever you are into is probably going to work. And you can be, again, as creative as you possibly would like to be. And you can really incorporate any style that is your style into this project, which is why I always like it. But please go back in the slideshow as you're creating your vision or as you're creating your theme. Go back in the slideshow and just double check that you understand all the requirements of the project. Are all of my lines totally parallel in both directions and vertically, right? Have I included a noticeable or a recognizable theme throughout the piece? Do I have at least 7 different openings, right? Have I shown my creativity? And then the last one is, do I have punches of color throughout with watercolor? We will do a demonstration and learn some watercolor techniques next, after we're done this stage. But that's your final requirement, is that you'll add some punches of color in watercolor using and applying some of those new watercolor techniques that we will learn. Okay, I cannot wait to see all your fabulous creativity and the many different styles that you choose to incorporate into your awesome enchanted environments. Okay, have fun.